While many pet owners will speak of a loving bond that develops between themselves and the animal they are charged with caring for, is it possible that such a bond could exist between humans and insects? In the March 3rd, 1961 edition of the Shrewsbury Chronicle, there is an odd story involving a man named Sam Rogers, a humble postman who spent much of his free time caring for the bees in his many hives. Upon his death, that affection was seemingly returned in kind. This case, which has been written about in numerous books including Life magazine, simply seems to defy logic, and does suggest that insects not only appreciate kindness, but can reciprocate it. Sam Rogers was a humble guy. He worked 44 years as a postman in Middle, a small village in Shropshire, England, about 10 miles north of Shrewsbury. Sam also worked as a handyman doing odd jobs around the village. In his spare time, Sam had an interesting hobby. He tended to bees. Sam loved them and would devote many long hours to keeping them healthy. To him, they were like members of his family. He had 14 hives, and each day he would go out to the area and care for them, even talking to them the way one would speak to a friend. He spoke tenderly to the insects, as if they could articulate every word and every gesture of goodwill and affection he offered. Then one day Sam did not come to the hives. Only 6 weeks after officially retiring from his job as a postman, Sam Rogers passed away. On the day of his death, 2 of Sam's children honored their father's memory by going out to the hives and speaking, as their father had done countless times, to the bees. They walked amongst the 14 hives, solemnly telling the insects of the passing of their beloved keeper. While this would seem like nothing more than a symbolic gesture on its face, what would happen next would leave Sam's friends and family and bee experts in England stunned. On the day after his funeral, a memorial service was being held at the church when it was noticed that swarm after swarm of bees, thousands of them, began coming in from the direction of Sam's home in Lower Middle, which was about a mile and a half away. Ignoring the flowering trees nearby, they settled down on Sam's grave and on the funeral wreaths surrounding it, much to the astonishment of the congregation. To the witnesses, the bees seemed to be concentrated in one area, where Sam was. About a half hour after arriving, the majority of the buzzing insects flew off, back in the direction of the cottage garden where Sam had cared for them for so many years. By nightfall, the last of them had flown off. The rector, Reverend J.C. Ailing, spoke to the Chronicle about the bizarre event. It was a remarkable sight. The bees were clustered all over the grave. The bees were formed in an enormous line, something like a funeral procession. Ailing found the whole thing odd, and the only thing he could think to explain it away logically was that they were attracted to the flowers on the grave, even though countless funerals had been held in the village over the years, and never before had bees reacted in such a way and on such a massive scale as they had when Sam passed. H.D. Pocock, chairman of a local beekeepers association, found the whole thing quite puzzling. Given the time of year Sam passed, late February, bees are still sluggish and rarely fly from their hives. Pocock thought it unusual that bees would fly that distance at that time of year to a specific location. He simply could not explain it. "I've never heard anything like it before," he told the Chronicle. Ailing himself likened it to the bees coming to pay their last respects to a man who had shown them so much kindness in his life. Of course, I try to rationalize such events, but if I didn't, I would say that those bees came to say goodbye to Sam. Interestingly, such cases aren't as uncommon as one might think. In May 1956, John Zepka of Adams, Massachusetts, passed away. Like Sam, John spent much of his time doting over his bees. On the day he was buried, mourners observed a swarm of bees overhead. The tent and floral sprays were also swarming with bees. The bees remained until the funeral was over, and then, as if on cue, they left. This behavior of insects and animals attending the funeral of the humans that loved them in life has been documented in numerous books. In 1967, Joseph Sproat passed away. Sproat had dedicated his life to training pigeons and held offices in the National Racing Pigeon Association. At his funeral, at Cavalry Cemetery in Pittsburgh, the mourners and an American Legion military salute team watched as a large flock of pigeons circled overhead and came to rest on a nearby hillside. When the services ended and the mourners were leaving, the birds flew from the hillside and came to rest on Joe's unburied casket. They flapped their wings and cooed softly before flying away. In an article published in a 1953 issue of Tomorrow magazine, Grace Isaacs wrote of a man named Henry. He owned a large cattle ranch near Trelawney. He cared a great deal for his animals and would not turn over the care of his animals to others for fear that they might hurt them. He died unexpectedly, and his coffin was placed in a wagon for journey to the church and the cemetery. The distance from the house to the gate of the estate was long, and along this route a large number of mourners were gathered. During the procession, the mourners were suddenly startled by the moaning and bellowing of cattle. Herds of animals gathered from the surrounding pastures and stood in long lines along the fence bordering the drive. They tossed their heads, pawed the ground, and lamented in tones quite unlike their usual lowing. To the mourners, it was as if the animals knew that the man who had cared for them in life had passed away, and they, in their own way, were saying goodbye. There are other instances of horses, chimpanzees, foxes, dolphins, and various other wild animals gathering to mourn the loss of a human who assisted them in life. Further, instances involving house pets, namely cats and dogs, who seek out and then will not leave the grave of their deceased owners, have also been collected by the hundreds by various researchers over the years and would require a much longer video to cover. In the end, I'm left to wonder, is it possible that the bond between humans and animals, and even insects, is much greater and more complex than any of us can quite understand?